Welcome to Unpacking Peanuts, the podcast where three cartoonists take an in-depth look at the greatest comic strip of all time, Peanuts by Charles M. Schulz.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Is it the future or 1999? No, it's neither. It's 1985, so we are going back to the future. I'll be your host for the proceedings. My name's Jimmy Gale, and I'm also a cartoonist. I did books like Amelia Rules, 7 Good Reasons Not to Grow Up, and The Dumbest Idea Ever. Joining me, as always, are my pals, co-hosts, and fellow cartoonists. He's a playwright and a composer, both for the band Complicated People, as well as for this very podcast. He's the co-creator of the original comic book price guide, the original editor for Amelia Rules, and the creator of such great strips as Strange Attractors, A Gathering of Spells, and Tangled River. It's Michael Cohen.
Say hey.
And he's an executive producer and writer of Mystery Science Theater 3000, a former vice president of Archie Comics, and the creator of the Instagram sensation Sweetest Beasts. It's Harold Buchholz.
Hello.
So we are here in 1985. If you guys have been listening out there religiously week by week, you might know that we announced recently we are going to start just taking our time with these strips. We were happy with the 2-episode-a-year format, but you know what? We're going to slow it down, and I'm excited that we're actually slowing it down now because we definitely missed some classic strips over the first 35 years, but a lot of people have already discussed those strips. There's books and books and movies made about how great that era of Peanuts is. This part is a little less documented, so I think it's exciting that we're gonna slow things down and take an even deeper look. So, guys, the one thing I want to talk about there, I quoted a great movie of 1985 off the top there, which is Back to the Future, and the whole premise of Back to the Future is how different 1985 was from 1955, and yet Schulz predates that with Peanuts by an additional 5 years. And I just want to talk about that's super inspiring to me. I can't imagine whether we talk about whether or not he's lost a little off his fastball or whether he's not the absolute pinnacle of his powers. But it's an astounding achievement to be this close to the heart of pop culture for 3.5 decades.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's conscious of pop culture, but I don't think he's really into it. Whatever was happening in the 80s was probably not on his mind, but he probably heard it from it.
No, but I just mean the fact that his work, whether it was on his mind or not, predates the rise of the hula hoop as a trend, and now we're at Duran Duran. You know, Paul McCartney's follow-up band to the Beatles has been gone for a half a decade now, and Schulz is still plugging away.
Yeah, well,
it's amazing.
Things are going downhill fast, that's for sure.
Things are going down fast.
Yeah, I mean, hula hoop, come on, great. Duran.
You know what? I will give you that one. I do think the hula hoop beats Duran Duran. Harold, does this area of conversation interest you at all?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that he was trying to stay on top of things. I mean, when I see things like Flash Beagle,
right,
from Schulz, I don't think he was a huge Flashdance fan. I think he's looking at what's going on in the culture, and he's responding to it. He's interested in what people are talking about and watching, and he does, I think, want to be relevant because otherwise I would think he would only be picking things that he personally was really interested in. And I don't think he was a huge Flashdance fan. But I know about him.
But the fact is,
now though, hold on. We cannot pass this by because I really just want to think about Schulz, the huge Flashdance fan. I picture him like, Genie, I worked it out. Now he's like doing the dance in the living room, miming.
Leg warmers.
Yeah, right. The whole thing, he's pounding them down. She's just, okay, Sparky.
You're a maniac on the floor, Sparky. No.
Well, look, I think the culture was way more united. I'm talking about that everybody was being fed the same stuff on the same three channels and the same few magazines.
Absolutely.
So, even though I was not into pop culture in 1985, I still read Newsweek and Time. And so whatever was big in the culture, everybody was reading, grandmas were reading about, they knew what Flashdance was because
right.
That's what people were talking about. What's the big thing right now?
Yeah.
Right. But if you look at the other strips that were his, I guess, most direct competition, if you want to call it competition, I don't see as much of that in, say, Beetle Bailey or Family Circus. There might be some references to things, but it does seem like Schultz does it more than others. And it does seem like he's trying to stay relevant with people in the moment. He's taking advantage of the fact that this is a daily strip that on the same day this is dropping into tens of millions of newspapers. And that I really find interesting about him, that even at 35 years in, he's not in his own little bubble. He's not in a crazy cat bubble where nothing changes. There's no sense of time. He is trying to, I think, reflect the culture and find ways to get people re-engaged with the strip. It seems like he's just a very competitive in that way. And I find that fascinating. Dating back, we remember the Davy Crockett thing 30 years ago.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Now it's Flash Spiegel.
It's a different world. Yeah. A completely different world, the Davy Crockett years to this. Yeah. The other thing I sort of want to talk about, Michael, you said we were being fed the same few choices by these big monolithic networks and stuff like that. And that's true of there were big, gigantic record labels and big, gigantic movie studios. If I think about the 80s, though, let's think about either movie or music rather and comics. There were really, really strong mainstream things going on. This was the era of things like in comic books like Watchmen and Dark Knight and all that. But there was also a counterculture going on, things like Love and Rockets and Cerebus. And that was the same way in music and stuff like that. And I was thinking recently, is there a counterculture these days? And then I thought, well, how could there be a counterculture? There's no culture. Like Taylor Swift and Beyonce can't carry everything. And I just think that it feels like not having big things that everybody can, or not everybody, but that gigantic, millions and millions of people can relate to, even hampers the stuff that's pushing against it.
Right.
If it doesn't exist,
Yeah, no, everybody can live in their own niche of culture.
Right.
And ignore the rest, and you still have a support system, that kind of confirms your opinions or argues your opinions. But yeah, nobody's listening to every kind of music. But back in the day, we were force fed everything. I mean, I'm talking further back in the day than you're talking about, but basically just top 40. Yeah. Could have a country song. It could have a Frank Sinatra song. It could have a psychedelic song. It's just whatever was selling is what you're going to hear. No, there wasn't any niche way of getting pop culture.
Right.
Yeah. It's fascinating how now the only thing we can do to get some sort of common culture again is to reboot something from the 80s or earlier.
Right.
Which version of the Addams Family are we going to redo now, or all these Marvel Spider-Man characters and all this stuff that kind of came from the collective experience of these characters through comic books and maybe an animated series, and they had a live action show on TV. That's all we've got right now is something that was known decades ago, and it's very rare to see something somehow break through like Baby Shark,
Right.
Yeah. But I think at this time also that there were some niche cultures that were coming out. Like, we're talking about Love and Rockets, which was focused kind of on the punk movement. And that was a niche culture. And I think, a lot of readers were attracted to that because nobody else was doing it. So it really stood out.
Yeah, and that's what I feel like. Yeah, like, the fact that Love and Rockets was a rare thing, and I'm just using this as an example. It could have been REM. It could have been anything that was a niche thing in the 80s. Because it was a rare example, it made it so much more important to the people who found it. But now there are web strips that we've never heard of that have millions and millions of readers that they might not even have any artistic value whatsoever, but they just exist and they're huge, but they're not culturally significant. They have no cultural impact.
Yeah, well, there's millions. I mean, there are millions of webcomics from, any. Well, it's also, I mean, that reflects Japanese culture a little more, which was very early on. Comic books were pretty much anything but superheroes.
Yeah.
You can have sushi chefs and baseball players, comics about them, because that was kind of a monoculture. But people were able to create identities by what they liked.
Yeah, I remember, people listening to pop music in particular. It seemed to me, because I wasn't really, as we had talked about before, about our musical interests and my lack of any any cachet in the music field, but it just felt so oppressive to me back then, because there was this top 40 and it was playing in every restaurant and in our high school, in the hallways. And it's like, well, whether you like it or not, this is the culture. And then you got people who were so passionately into these rock groups where, I mean, the level to which all of that was elevated. I think people who are growing up today, they have no idea of what there was this weird cultural peer pressure that doesn't really exist anymore. In a way that's kind of refreshing, I think.
Is that true? That there isn't peer pressure?
Well, cultural peer pressure. I mean, individual peer pressure, I think in high school, I think still exists.
Well,
to some
but
extent.
I think
the idea that, you have a group that identifies themselves as the Who freaks, and there's another group that's totally into some other band, and that you define your friends through that culture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's still there. I mean, you got your Swifties. You've got the jam bands,
and I think the peer pressure stuff has moved on to online. Yeah, like it's how you look and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but relating to comics of this period, now I'm not that familiar with the other strips, but I was very familiar with Bloom County, and I seem to recall there was quite a few popular references. I mean, there was a start.
Tons
references and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Tons, yeah. He was messing with all sorts of things. What was the name of the dog? Spuds McKenzie.
Yeah,
I think he was messing around with that because there was all this controversy that there was this popular dog for was it for beer and
a beer? Was it Coors?
Super appealing to kids,
right?
What are you doing? I remember he was making fun of that and.
Yeah, and the beer comes through, we're like, what? We don't really test market these ads or anything.
Kids like this Joe Camel fellow?
Who knew?
We just thought Chester Cheetah was popular with the kids. We had no idea that Joe Camel was such a thing. Yeah. But yeah, it really has changed, and it does seem in some ways that the pressure is a little bit off of what I remember as a kid. But, being an older adult, I don't know if that's true. It'd be interesting if we have some younger listeners that they kind of let us know where they're experiencing that kind of, the power of culture on you, whether you like it or not. Do you still experience that? And in what form does it like? I think you're right about the social media. We have a whole new world of inundation of information and, the influencers.
I can't even imagine. Now, listen, we're going to get to the strips, but this whole topic of conversation is going to come up a little bit later. I posted something on Twitter and it was, I said, make comics, not content. And super listener, Joshua Stauffer asked, what's the difference? I see comics as a type of content which he's not wrong about, right? But he said, can you elaborate? And I attempted to, but my night had already started, so it was a bad time to be tweeting. So I said, we're going to just take this up on the podcast. So when we get to the mail, we'll talk about that. What's the difference between art and content?
I think the difference is that content is something needed to fill a space. And the next issue of Spider-Man is going to come out. It has
to be there.
You had to fill it.
Right.
Whereas the stuff we do, if we don't do it, it's there's nothing there. There's zero.
Right. Yeah, that's actually brilliant. Yeah, you're right. And it's also not an absence because it doesn't have to be there.
Yeah.
Which makes what we do so much more special. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but
we said it. We say as we do our weekly podcast.
Exactly.
No,
yeah,
this is content.
Yes.
But it's also a new buzzword for how to do multiple things with the same amount of content. I mean, if you produce content, then you can do audio content, and you can do blog posts, and you can do articles on Reddit, and you can make an ebook. You can do multiple things with your content, and it doesn't really matter
Slice
what it is.
And dice it. Yeah.
Right. Yes, it doesn't matter what it is. Okay. Well, I guess we're talking about this now, Joshua. Yeah. We're skipping ahead. But content to me is exactly what those guys were saying. It is something that is there just to fill a space. In some way, the comic strips themselves were content, right? Because they're there to fill space in the paper to get
and
you
they
to
had to be there every day.
Every single day. Now, within that, like Peanuts here, Charles.
Yeah, Burke Breathed says he's busy making comics for tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy this blank space.
Right. Now, within that idea of this just content creation stuff, art can occur like it did here with Peanuts. And that's what I meant by comics. I was using comics as a code for art comics, meaning people trying to express something genuine. I think the first 37 or whatever they are issues of Spider-Man are art. After that, it becomes content. It becomes, all right, Spider-Man needs to exist. Who's available? You know?
So, Jimmy, what's the mindset you're putting across there in that tweet? What are you saying regarding the creator? How are you supposed to see what you make that changes content into comics?
The comic has to be the thing you are focusing on. I am drawing this comic. I'm not creating an OC and this world because I'm an imaginary J.R.R. Tolkien.
Well,
because that's
there's a huge difference, and I think your Spider-Man analogy doesn't really work because these guys were surviving on a paycheck. And
I'm not criticizing them. Look, I agree. I do Donald Duck comics, right? But they're Donald Duck content because they tell me, you know what I mean?
Well, couldn't you from your own mindset make comics when you were assigned? Well, it's just like Schultz, right? He's obviously in the content category because he's on a deadline, but he's also making comics. He's making art.
Because he has the choice to do whatever he wants. I mean, the editor might get pissed, but he's not fulfilling. You have to have Charlie Brown and Snoopy in every strip,
right?
Yeah.
It kind of breaks down. Well, let me just because you did mention what he said about Spider-Man is the Steve Ditko issues, the man who pretty much created it, but he was burned out at the end of that period. And people kind of notice that the last 3 or 4 issues were just they weren't as good, but he wasn't coming up with anything really brilliant or new. He was just, killing time basically. So in that case, he was just doing content. Well, I got to do another issue.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true too.
I'm still kind of lost in what you're saying about the mindset. That what gets you to the better place, like the Donald Duck comic that you write. If you looked at that Donald Duck comic, which you do have to do because you've agreed to do it, is there a way for you to look at it so that it maybe has a better chance of being the art that you're talking about?
When I'm doing it, when I'm sitting there at my notebook and I'm writing a Donald Duck comic, I am trying to be the James Joyce of Donald Duck comics. I mean, I am there are jokes in the Donald Duck comics that the editors didn't get. I mean, I know that for a fact, but it'll never be much beyond that, because then the editor is going to do what they have to do with it. And then the legal department's going to do what they have to do with it. And then it's going to go to an artist that I've never met and that I didn't know who it was before. And they may be Steve Ditko, or they may be Larry Ditko, Steve's less talented nephew. And there's no way to control any of that. Okay. All right. Okay. I posted that. Then Fran Connor, a good friend of mine, a friend of mine for, 49 years, and a Shakespeare professor, said, yeah, this is what you mean. And he posted like every Marvel movie that's coming out for the next like X amount of years, every Marvel movie, every Star Wars movie, every DC movie. They don't have scripts. They don't have casts. They don't have directors, but they're coming out.
Yep.
That's content.
That's content.
Sam Raimi making that first Spider-Man movie is art, whether you like it or not. It's pop art. It's, it's not the Mona Lisa, but it's everybody. We're making a movie. They're just extending intellectual property brands
it's the
indefinitely.
franchise. But what you're doing, I mean, the way I look at it is what you're doing on the Donald Duck stuff is you're amusing yourself.
Yeah.
By seeing if you can put in some real creativity, and no one will notice. Hopefully no one will notice you're being creative.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is, if you're an artist, let's say you're the director or screenwriter who gets to make his first Hulk movie, and because you've been doing other great things and they see you and they say, hey, how would you like to plug into this world? The artist can't help but make art or comics or movies. And, having worn the hat of the producer, I mean, I think the producer looks at that very same thing as content, because that's the producer's job. But the artist, hopefully, is always looking at it as art. No matter what they've been assigned, they're going to put their stamp on it. They're going to make their own unique, like the Barbie movie. Who knew that somebody was going to discover something.
The first Hulk movie is ridiculed, and it was by probably the only genuine artist. The Ang Lee, but sometimes people just want to make some money.
Dude, hey, Martin Scorsese made commercials.
Yeah, I've seen some people say, I'm going to create art, and because they're saying I'm going to create art, that's when they get themselves in a ton of trouble.
Yeah,
because they get a little too high-minded, and they kind of forget that there's content.
Yeah, but the other thing about that is that's okay, because you can fail, and that's up to you.
Sure.
The content. Another thing is content is generally created or is called into existence by a corporation. Like, if they don't call me next month to do Donald Duck comics, it's not because Donald Duck comics cease to exist or I have perfected them. It's just that they've moved on to somebody else.
Yeah, well, it's not just a corporation; it's a team, and it's hard to control art when there's 10 people in the room.
Mm-hmm.
So someone like Schultz, I mean, these are the people who can create art. I mean, first of all, they're financially secure, and they've created the characters. They know the characters. And if they want to risk their financial security, they can take it in any direction they want and not worry about the readers or the editors.
Right. So, Jimmy, is this a way to kind of restate what you're saying? So I'm kind of still trying to get what you're, because that's a bold statement that it seems like if
baby, it's bold.
Trying to say, if you grasp what you're trying to say, that hopefully it's helpful to creators. Is it just tell the story you want to tell and don't worry about where it fits? Is that a good way to put it?
Create a comic, not content. I am making a comic book. It's going to be however many pages. It is going to be this story that I desperately want to tell. It's going to contain these jokes or these tragic moments and all this stuff. And I'm going to do it in the style that I want to do. And it's going to be a complete unit in and of itself. It is not designed to later be a Happy Meal and later be a lunchbox and later be a 16 parts prequel spin-off series. That all can happen, but that don't make that your goal, because I'm sorry, that's a stupid goal. And I know that there are millions of people out there who want that. I know that there are people listening who desperately want that. It's a stupid goal. Make something of value.
Well,
Otherwise,
I agree with that.
You can be
but
a reality TV star. Just be a Kardashian, and that's it. It'll be easy.
But then again,
get a
there's
budget.
people who think, if I could just make a living doing comics, I love them. If somebody wants to compromise and go like, okay, I got a job at Marvel drawing, their, C-level feature, but at least I'm in the biz and eventually I can get to where I want to be. I don't knock that.
I don't knock it either, but they better be making great comics and not be trying to sit around and concoct a franchise because it's just going to be much.
No, but they're still working from someone else's script. I mean, really, when I read comics or collect comics these days, almost without exception, the only exception being Alan Moore, is these are things that are written and drawn by the same person.
Right. Yeah, and that's who I assume I'm talking to. Like, I'm not talking really about to the people who are working jobs. Like I said, I work at the Donald Duck job, and I am thinking of it as a comic, but I don't necessarily care if other people are thinking about their Donald Duck comics that way, because Donald Duck is a franchise. Donald Duck is content. Donald Duck will exist long after us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the art of Peanuts. I see it as the art of creating characters who you care about.
Mm-hmm.
And what comes out of their mouth is consistent with their personalities. I think we're in a period now where the jokes aren't funny, and the art, even though it's still good, is to me going downhill. But then again, he's creating characters that are extremely one of a kind, and I think that's why Peanuts is still popular, because it transcends medium. It works for movies, so I hear, or specials. It works on lunch pails. It's the characters. And so the art of Schultz's greatest contribution is creating, dozens, well, I don't know if it's that many, but at least a dozen really memorable characters.
Yeah. All right, Joshua. So hopefully that answers your question. I doubt it.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
I don't remember. But the one thing I will say, just create a dozen or so super memorable characters and you should be okay with it. All right. How about we just take a break? Should we take a break now before we even get to this? And then we'll start the strips and then come back with our new segment. What flavor milkshake am I drinking?
Woo! Woo! Our new segment, let's talk about peanut strips.
And we're back. All right. So with that simple philosophical conversation out of the way, how about we get to the strips?
Sure.
All right. So if you guys out there want to follow along, what you could do is you hop on over to the old Unpacking Peanuts website. There you're going to sign up for the Great Peanuts Reread, and that'll get you one email a month from us letting you know what strips we're going to cover. That way, you can do a little homework ahead of time and read along with us. Other ways you can follow along, you can go to gocomics.com, type in Peanuts as I read the date. You type it in there, and away you go. So let's get started. Okay. We're going to read at least two in a row here because it's a little bit of a sequence. January 7th, 1985. Peppermint Patty is out in the schoolyard at lunch, sitting on a bench and eating out of a paper bag. Marcy comes up clutching her lunch bag and says to Peppermint Patty, "You won, sir." Peppermint Patty, without looking up, says, "Won what?" Marcy answers, "I just heard that your essay on what you did during Christmas vacation won the all-city school essay contest." And Marcy congratulates her in the next panel, saying, "You wrote about looking at the clouds, remember? Anyway, you won. Congratulations." In the last panel, we see Peppermint Patty rubbing something on her face, and Marcy looks at her and says, "Don't wipe your tears away with your French fries, sir." And we see that's exactly what a jubilant Peppermint Patty is doing. And then we see it continues on to the next date, January 8th, where Marcy is standing in front of the classroom, and she says, "I've been asked to make this important announcement. One of our classmates, Miss Patricia Reichart, has just won the All-City Essay Contest." Marcy continues, "Her essay on what she did during her Christmas vacation has won first prize." A flummoxed Peppermint Patty sitting in her seat says, "How did I win? I got a D-."
No, my question on this one was: is this the first time we heard her last name?
I asked that too. You know what? I don't think so because the Peanuts wiki doesn't indicate that this strip says that. But I am just so happy that we have now gotten to 1985 and we are still doing. So is this the first time? And in that initial thing, I said we would be the ones telling the listeners when the first thing happens, but we're not. We just go, is this the first thing? And whoever asks it, the other two go, I don't know. So I don't know.
Well, then we ask our listeners.
We're just amateur peanutologists. We're not experts.
Exactly. Yeah, there's real scholars out there. But I think it's super cool that Peppermint Patty has a last name.
Very few characters do.
Yes. Yeah, you've made it to the top tier when you have a last name in Peanuts.
Yeah. I think 5 had a last name.
And that seems like a very specific last name, right? So
yeah.
The other question is, did he know a Reichardt that he's honoring with Peppermint Patty?
It's funny because we normally do the mail all in one spot, but we actually got a text to the hotline that addressed this very question. It said, do you have any insight into how Schultz came up with such great character names? And it was that's from Ken Goldmere. So I don't know. So yeah, answering he does have a knack for names. Peppermint Patty, famously, he saw the candy in a dish and thought I better take that name before Mort Walker does. Charlie Brown was named after a friend of his. Linus was named after a friend of his. Frida. So a lot of his naming does come from just people he knew, which is something I always tried to avoid. Like I would feel weird having a character named Harold. Because and you'd be like, this guy's a real jerk. You'd be like, gee, Jimmy, I don't know. No.
Yeah, no, the name Harold is reserved for henpecked husbands and Saint Bernard. So
yeah, so I think he does have a knack for it, though. He knows a good word and he knows a good name when he hears it, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I think the names are special to us because the characters are special. To Michael's point, what he was saying, creating great characters. The names are special because the characters are special. Simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to disentangle. To me, like you hear the word Schroeder, and it just sounds like it is associated with classical music. But of course it does, because the only time I ever heard the name Schroeder was associated with the character Schroeder. Still, if the pianist was named, Sticky Pete, I don't think it would be as good. So,
so here it is. Reichardt was the last name of his secretary, Sue.
Oh, there you go. That's very cool.
That's kind of nice.
Tribute to her, yeah.
Right. That's really pretty cool. Now that makes me wonder. Now I don't know how long he had that secretary, but I wonder if there were any traits of the secretary that got into the character.
Yeah, that'll be something we could maybe explore in a Peppermint Patty focus someday. So this storyline also carries over from last year, which back on December 28th, Peppermint Patty actually delivers this essay to her teacher about looking at the clouds, and Michael pointed out that he thought that was pretty prose when we covered it, and apparently the people judging the essay contest agreed. I also think it's funny. This seems to be a little bit Schultz taking another kick at the old do you not share my C? Where the teacher grades it a D-, but seen through somebody else's eyes, it's an A.
I'm siding with the teacher.
Why?
You're giving her all D-.
Well, the teacher's job is, you don't want to dumb down the students by accepting something that it was not really special in any way and praising it.
So but didn't you say you thought it was kind of special?
Well, the writing was nice, but it's not an award-winning essay.
Well, it is. It just won. Shows you
I think it was fixed.
Well, this is interesting where my mind went. I thought, and I really got concerned for Peppermint Patty, is does this teacher have it in for people?
Have it in for her. Yeah.
And that's really sinister, and that's kind of scary because, you know, I don't know if you guys have ever had that experience. I've had that, at least that felt experience, that there was a teacher that, you know, they don't like you, it's just a personality thing or whatever. And boy, you're going to have a really hard time in that class. And seeing Peppermint Patty being held back by this teacher.
Yeah.
I'm still on the teacher side.
And then the teacher, I don't know how the teacher changes their mind, but it sounds like she still has the teacher. It's like the teacher went up a grade with her or something. I don't know. But it's, I just start feeling really nervous for Peppermint Patty if she's practically being flunked all the time. And then this other group of people says, no, this is brilliant. You're a brilliant kid.
It also has to do with different criteria by which anything is judged. And there is a great joke about this, about not listening to the critics, because, you know, a critic is just a critic, even if it's a teacher in a class. Now, I mean, but she may have gotten a D- based on the fact that the essay had to have 500 words, and she didn't. It had to be typed, and it wasn't. It had to be neat with no spelling errors.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think the essay contest might have gone like, oh, she doesn't have a mother, and she's a bad student. Let's just give her.
Do you think they fill that out?
I believe this whole thing is rigged.
I just want to know how that essay got to the contest. Peppermint Patty obviously didn't submit it, and I'd be surprised that I guess the teacher could have just thrown all of the essays into a bin
well,
but it would
actually,
probably had a big D- on it, you know.
I do sort of remember something like this sort of happened to me in high school, in that we had to write an essay about who our American hero is, and the teacher, everyone was getting submitted in the whole class, but it was for a $500 scholarship. And she called like three of us up and said, I think you three have a chance of winning this. Just like make these couple changes and blah, blah, blah. And of course, we didn't win at all. It was some kid who just wrote my American heroes, Vietnam vets. And that was it. You can't beat that. It was like
beat Captain America,
right?
Well, your obvious choice.
No, I'm not telling you who I picked. But also, yeah, I mean it's different criteria. I lost an Emmy award once. We did a story about a cool soul record company in Harrisburg, and the one we lost to was a kid beating cancer. You don't beat. You could. You know what I mean? I didn't go to the award ceremony because I knew how that was coming.
Man,
you didn't want to boo the kid.
Yeah, what a ripoff! Oh, and here we go. Leading to that conclusion from Snoopy, we have January 9th. So Peppermint Patty's explaining this to Charlie Brown and Snoopy, who's standing there, and she says, explain this if you can, Chuck. Everyone in our class had to write an essay on what we did during Christmas vacation. When I got mine back, the teacher had given me a D-. Well, I'm used to that, Chuck, right? She continues in panel 3. Now, guess what? All those essays went into a city essay contest, and I won. Explain that, Chuck. And Snoopy sums it all up lying atop his doghouse. Never listen to the reviewers. I take it back. If I was going to get a Peanuts tattoo, I would get never listen to.
Oh, but I rely on the reviewers to tell me what I thought. I mean, really, I can't form my own opinions.
Yeah, don't you hate it when you go to a movie and you're like, that was really good, and then you read a review and you're like, oh, I guess I didn't like it.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that Schultz did this for Peppermint Patty, you know, because she's constantly struggling in school, and that not only one person, but whoever was this committee that decided, they gave her the thumbs up, and that Schultz is saying, hey, look, you know, you might be judged by somebody, but that doesn't mean that you don't have worth or value, or maybe you're special to someone in your own way, you know?
All right, here's my little autobiographical thing. Amongst my friends in school, there were some A students, there were some B students. I was like a C student. And there was my unmentioned friend, D- all the time. I mean, he was Peppermint Patty. He got D- on everything. He didn't do any homework. He's by far the most successful of anybody I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I truly do believe if anyone tells you any platitude, just do the opposite. Pull a George Costanza and do the opposite. It's almost always wrong. Never listening to the reviewers. This made me think of something. A few episodes back, we were talking about putting personality into your art and how sometimes it rubs against people the wrong way. And Harold asked if that ever happened to me. My lovely daughter Stella reminded me of our favorite one, and it makes me laugh to just even think about it. It was a review that said, I just didn't vibe with the main character. Frankly, I think he was a bit of a prick. Now, that would be one thing, but it was my memoir. It was my memoir.
Oh, no.
Then the guy goes, maybe it was the writer being self-aware. Like, yeah, maybe. But
Ooh, that hurts. Well, if there are any podcast reviewers out there, just ignore everything we're saying. We love reviewers.
Podcast reviewers are the exception.
January 13th. It's a Sunday strip, a pretty cool panel of Snoopy, Lucy, and Linus, their heads atop 3 snowman bodies of varying sizes. Nice looking drawing. Another great looking panel of Lucy sneaking out, peeking from behind a tree in the snow. It looks like there's going to be a snowball fight going on here. Next panel, we see Linus and Snoopy revved back, ready to throw a snowball, and Lucy facing them the other way. Linus says, "Go ahead, throw it." Then very smugly, he says, "There's 2 of us and only 1 of you. We've got you outnumbered." But then, unbeknownst to Linus, behind him, Snoopy decides to bail. He says, "I think I hear a chocolate chip cookie calling me." And then Linus continues, "Okay, Snoopy, let's show her that." But then Linus turns around, sees Snoopy has left, and Lucy just pastes him with a snowball from about 2 inches away. And then we see Linus in the last panel climbing atop the doghouse with a giant snowball balanced just on the peak, and Snoopy's underneath it, his nose sticking out. And Linus says, "Come on out. I have another cookie for you."
I don't see Linus as being this vindictive. Besides, the snowball missed him.
Yeah, I thought this was a funny one, but I was a little struck by Linus taking his revenge on Snoopy there.
Yeah, I know, but you guys have very wussy views of Linus.
Well, if
he's
we
a much more
ourselves
rounded character than someone who just sits there and thinks sweet thoughts and stuff like that. I think he would love to paste Lucy with a couple snowballs. I think he wishes he had all the Beagle Scouts behind him as well. I don't see anything out of the ordinary here.
Well, I can't. The 2 things strike me in this strip. One is when Lucy throws the snowball at Linus, it's still completely intact after it's pasted him. So I think that's a lot of ice in there. That was probably a very painful snowball. So maybe that's why
it looks like he dodged it. I mean, it's not deflected. Look at its course. It's
that's how hard it was hit.
It was no, I don't think I think he dodged it.
And the other thing that stands out to me, and this is in that world of that these characters live in the mind of Charles Schulz. And so they all have a common experience that's beyond what you would have in real life. Snoopy's just walking away saying, "I think I hear a chocolate chip cookie calling me." And in the last panel, Linus somehow knows that that's what Snoopy was thinking when he walked away, even though Linus didn't even know he walked away. But somehow he knows that Snoopy left because of the chocolate chip cookie. The surreality of that, and the way that Schulz lets the characters somehow in on the minds of the other characters creates, I don't know what it creates, but it's kind of this magical world that does not line up with the world that we live in the sense that you can think the thoughts of a dog character and know what he's thinking, even though you're not aware what he was thinking when he left you. It's wild. Unless possibly Snoopy did come back with a chocolate chip cookie in a panel we didn't see.
Right. January 20th. I don't know who picked this one, but I'll never forgive them. So Snoopy's out on the golf course and he says, "Stupid tree." He's looking at the tree while he says it. Then we see him take a big swing with the driver. Then the next panel, the strip really starts because it's a Sunday. They say, "Not again." Snoopy has his little golf ball right up against a tree. And he says, "Every shot I hit seems to end up behind a tree." And then 2 panels later, we see that's the same case again. He goes, "I can't stand it. Sometimes I think that as soon as I hit a shot, a tree runs out and stands in front of my ball." The next panel, Snoopy takes a mighty swing, and we see the tree doing just that, running out on its big, ridiculous feet with Mickey Mouse hands, which are actually just leaves. And in the last panel, of course, it arrives right in front of Snoopy's ball, blocking it, and Snoopy rolls his eyes.
So what do you think of this one?
I think it's a golf strip.
No, I picked it because we didn't realize that Tolkien was a big influence on Schultz.
Oh my gosh, it's an ant. I didn't think of that.
Well, it's also
That's amazing.
A week later than the previous strip, and the season has changed dramatically.
I was going to say this is, and I say this with all love, this is a rich guy in California cartooning. Right? Hitting the links with a nice sweater on in late January. Although my dad would have hit the links in January if there was no snow or permafrost on the ground, he would have been out there.
And again, this is like where Schultz kind of has a character who will something into an existence in a way.
Yeah.
You know, he imagines it and then it becomes real. And I don't know how you look at that, but he's willing to go into this kind of surreal kite-eating tree.
This definitely fits into the weird Peanuts. I just have the date written with a big question mark after it. What was he thinking?
He was a rich guy out on the golf course in January, and he kept hitting the ball in front of trees. I mean, that's what it like. You know what I mean? This was not an attempt, I don't think, to entertain the masses. However, that next to the last panel with those hands, which look like Mickey Mouse gloves but are just leaves, that's so cool. That makes me laugh.
And yeah, me too. And it's that classic Charles Schultz run where you put both of your arms up and let your hands drop below you, like 90-degree angles. That's so Charles Schultz. You know, we were just talking about it the other day with Charlie Brown. When you see a character running, and an animation person would have like one arm in the front and another arm in the back, you know, at different angles. Yeah, and we don't see that in Schultz's.
Well, it's so strange too,
but it's hilarious.
I have so much running in the Amelia comics, and if you don't do contrapposto, meaning the left leg is out, then the right arm is forward. You know, if you have like both, if you do anything weird like what Schultz is doing, I find it looks wrong and just awkward. But he just has this iconic. He just came across that goofy pose, and it's so funny. It's so great. February 21st, Linus is out making what looks like a little stone wall, and Lucy is going to come up and, of course, criticize it. And she says, "Why, may I ask, are you building a useless rock wall?" And Linus says, "I discovered that I have the ability to pick up a rock and to carry it from one place to another. Then I discovered that I could pile them up and make a rock wall. It's ugly and useless, but who cares?" Lucy walks away saying, "When you're done, you can make a second wall with the rocks in your head." I picked this one because I've seen this rock wall. Charles Schultz, and this is written about in his book, or not his book, but in the biography by Rita Grimsley Johnson called Good Grief. And he talks about he was doing this as sort of like a meditative therapy exercise, just picking up rocks around his property and turning them into this wall, until I think it was Jeannie or maybe one of his kids said, "Hey, you're building the wall from the strip." But it hadn't occurred to him. So when I got to stay out there, I got a picture of my little girls at the thinking wall made by Charles Schultz. I just really wanted to just brag about that. That's why I picked that strip. Also, I love the way the rocks. Rocks are fun to draw.
Michael used to love building rock walls.
It was the greatest therapy.
Yeah,
just walk
really?
around in the woods behind our house and go, a great rock, it's flat. And then, I'd lug it over I was rebuilding the well, which had mostly fallen apart. Yeah, I love looking for rocks.
Well, New Hampshire has those everywhere, right? I mean, there's stone walls all through New Hampshire.
Yeah, and for some reason I can understand why, because it's very therapeutic to lug rocks and put them in a nice little shape.
Schultz agreed, apparently. February 28th. Snoopy's lying atop the doghouse, and Lucy comes up. She's in a real crabby mode this month, and she says, sleeping again. And Snoopy says, till now. Lucy's outraged. She says, is sleeping all you ever think about? And a really groggy-looking Snoopy says, only when I'm awake. Then he rolls over and says, when I'm asleep, I don't think about it.
Yeah, this goes along with my theory that sleep was one of the main topics of Peanuts. Sleep is really important.
Absolutely. It is I think it's one of the great joys of life. An afternoon nap on a sunny day or a rainy day or a snowy day.
Yep. No, it's the highlight.
What about cloudy days?
It's the highlight.
You know what? Those I try to stay up for. Oh, man. Okay, so we're going to take a second break here. It's unprecedented. Then we're going to come back. Then we'll finally do the mail and that fantastic milkshake challenge you've been waiting for. And then do a couple more strips. All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. We all love listening to Jimmy describe what's going on in a Peanut strip. But did you know that comics are actually a visual medium? That's right. You can see them anytime you want at gocomics.com or in your very own copy of The Complete Peanuts, available from Fantagraphics. Plus, if you sign up for our monthly newsletter, you'll know in advance which strips we're talking about each week. Learn more about the great Peanuts reread at unpackingpeanuts.com.
Okay, we're back. We're going to check the mailbox. But first, our brand new and beloved already segment, What flavor milkshake am I drinking? Remember, there are 3 choices: vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. I'm going to ask my pals, co-hosts, fellow cartoonists, and producers what they think I'm drinking, and we'll see who's right. You can play along if you want to, but please remember, no wagering. All right. Michael, what do you think? Chocolate, vanilla, strawberry?
That's vanilla.
Chocolate.
Harold?
I'm going with the box odds chocolate.
It is chocolate.
Oh.
We added that, and we don't charge any extra. That's a whole new segment. Same free price for you. All right, but I am hanging out in the mailbox enjoying my milkshake. So we got anything?
We do. We got a lot this week. Let me see.
Great.
Okay, so do you remember Paul Hébert?
I do.
He's the guy who wrote a while back and mentioned his Doonesbury blog. And based on our discussion of the Doonesbury strip, the relationship between Honey, the person we couldn't remember her name,
right,
Duke's translator, and Marcy is something he dug into at length. And he has given us the link.
Oh, awesome.
And I will put it into the show notes.
Oh, thank you, Paul.
Great.
That's fantastic.
He also adds, everyone is quick to point out how Breath had borrowed from Trudeau, but fewer people talk about what is clearly his biggest influence, Walt Kelly. Without Pogo, there's no Opus.
That's interesting. I wonder, has Breath had talked about that influence from Kelly? Because I'm a huge Walt Kelly fan, and I never put the two together, so it's interesting.
Oh, really? Yeah, I always thought there must have been, because the politics and the animals are much more, not just Opus, but there's the groundhog, there's the rabbit, all in, Opus is then obviously built a cat and stuff like that. So he does have a little like mini Pogo cast within the larger Bloom County cast.
Yeah, much different flavor of humor in a lot of ways, but that's interesting. Yeah.
Just speaking of Doonesbury, we were talking about, if we're going to do other cartoonists and stuff. If I were to pick a sequence to re-examine from another cartoonist, there's a sequence from about 20 years ago in Doonesbury where BD goes to Iraq and is wounded. And I think it might be the best comic sequence ever. It's profound. It's really, really, really good. And it's not super partisan political thing. It's a real human story, and I love it. So we should look at that someday in our free time.
I will make a note. Then William Pepper, friend of the show, writes, I have a question. When Jim Sasseville and Dale Hale were working on the Peanuts comic books, did they also use Schultz's preferred pen nib? If so, did they have to buy their own, or did Schultz give them some of his private stock? If or when they were using a different pen, can you tell, and how?
First off, William Pepper, host of It's a Podcast, Charlie Brown. Great podcast you need to be listening to if you're a Peanuts fan. I bet a lot of that would have been up to the artist doing it. I think from what I look at, when I look at the Sasseville stuff, it looks more to me like a Hunt 102, which is like a slightly stiffer, thinner, scratchier instrument. But that could just be how Sasseville is using the pen that he's using, and it's not the pen itself. It is hard to tell. They talk about the first Led Zeppelin album, selling 1 million Les Pauls, but there's no Les Paul guitar on the record. It is hard to tell. And I think when we know that Schultz always used that Radio 914, we maybe assume it was used by Sasseville, but I think it would probably be up to Sasseville, whatever he wanted to use. What do you guys think?
I have no idea. I'd have to pull up some Sasseville stuff to look at. It's interesting, given Schultz felt so highly about that maybe he offered it and they said, I can't draw with this thing, and then you just ultimately have to let the artist use what they used.
Yeah, I mean, or they are using it and that's the closest they can get. It is really hard to say without like a photograph or, a direct testimony from someone.
Jimmy, you've drawn Peanuts characters with that Radio 914 nib, right?
Yeah.
So what was your experience when, for the first time, you're trying to draw a Peanuts character using the same tool that Schultz did? Did it seem to make like, oh, it all makes sense now? Or were you like, how on earth did he do this?
At first, I couldn't get it to put any ink on the paper. I was like,
really?
Okay, I don't understand. And I had inked at that point, I don't know, hundreds of pages with a crow quill pen, like an idiot in the 21st century. But I couldn't make that thing work. And then I put it away. I got like 5 of them. And I put it away, and then I was reading that interview I don't know if it was reading it or it was in a video I saw or something where he says it was a writing pen. And I thought, so I pulled it out and was like, well, let's write my name. And I was like, oh, wait a second. I see what it is. It's really, actually, you have to sort of unlearn the stuff you learned for a regular dip pen. It's actually more intuitive than a regular dip pen. You can have more freedom with it. But what was frustrating is, you get the lines and you're like, oh my God, those are Peanuts lines. But it only highlights all the more that you're not Charles Schultz, because there is some magic.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because I could never get a crow quill to work. I would fight with them, and I ultimately just gave up. And when I also got some of the 914 nibs, and like you said, it was much more intuitive, and I instantly could start using it. And when I was trying to draw a Peanuts character as well as I could, it really looked like a Peanuts character. I was like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
it's very
pretty
exciting.
Amazing.
Yeah. That's the best answer I could give, though.
And Jim Pooey McCleary writes, I vaguely remember my headmaster / Latin teacher having a book with a bit of Peanuts in Latin. I do remember at the time that the Holy Grail was to collect albums issues of Asterix that were translated into Latin and also Esperanto. Schultz was, of course, familiar with one phrase in Latin as it appears in his January 11th, 1965 strip, Felicitas est parvus canus calidus. Happiness is a warm puppy.
That's cool. And
Very
of course,
cool.
he had a lot of them in When Snoopy's a Lawyer.
And he adds, considering that Linus is a Latinate name, now I'm wishing that the strip had taken place in classical antiquity. Snoopy's flashbacks to the Gallic Wars would be especially exciting.
My advice would be go for it. I think that's a fan comic waiting to happen. All right. Well, if you guys want to get in touch with us, what you can do is you can go over to our website, unpackingpeanuts.com, and just fire off an email. We're unpackingpeanuts@gmail.com. We would absolutely love to hear from you. And of course, you can always either send us a text or shoot us a voicemail. And that number is
717
219
4162.
All right, let's get back to the strips. March 2nd. Lucy and Charlie Brown are hanging out at the thinking wall, and Charlie Brown says, in a good conversation, one person talks while the other listens. Then that person talks while the first person listens. Lucy takes this in and says, I like talking. I hate listening. Charlie Brown says, I realize that. And Lucy answers, what?
I've stolen this joke from it.
That's brilliant, right?
Brilliant, but pretty obvious, too.
Yes, but also great. It's a joke that you would do a million times as a kid. You know, I didn't hear you. What? But in a comic strip, that just struck me as really funny.
It's weird that Charlie Brown rolls his eyes in the fourth panel and you draw that little line down from the pupil to show that. He's missing it on one side.
Yeah.
That's really odd. It's like he left it off.
It is
Do you think
weird.
that's on purpose or he forgot?
I think maybe, who knows? It might have, again, it's impossible to really know, but it seems like it might be the kind of thing where, he was trying to draw him, not just rolling his eyes upward, but he's rolling his eyes upward and to his left, our right. And to do that, the part of the parentheses would then conflict with his nose. So he did it that way instead. As opposed, because it's a different look if you put them the other way. If you just flip the eye and have the parentheses on the outside,
Yeah, so maybe he tried it and then he whited it out. It's like, that's just
March 5th. Sally and Eudora are at the Tiny Tots concert. Sally says to Eudora, every time we come to one of these concerts, they play Peter and the Wolf. They must think we don't understand anything else. Sally says, don't you like Peter and the Wolf? And Sally says, I don't know. I've never understood it. Those are two back-to-back good punchy jokes.
This is a good one. As far as I can tell, though, Eudora has no personality.
But she did get a haircut.
She did. I like a good no personality character. I want to do an episode where we have to draft a comic strip using the Peanuts characters. So we'd each have to pick a main character, a supporting character, comic relief, whatever, and see if we could come up with each of us come up with a unique, different cast that would make its own comic just using the Peanuts characters. I could find a spot for Eudora. She gets on base.
Well, either her or Schroeder. Shermy.
Shermy, yeah.
There's the Shermy slot.
So is Eudora active in the Nirvana era?
She's around. Yeah. She's around. We're getting there now.
She grew into it. Yeah, with that hat and that hair and
yeah. But I think you were right about the Imperial Margarine, though. I think it's closer.
We're only 6 years away from the Nirvana era at this point. Well, actually, we're only 4 years away from their first album. That's
wow. We're probably about 10 years from Imperial Margarine.
March 10th. Charlie Brown's atop the mound, and he lets one rip. It turns out to be a high pop. He yells, a pop fly. I got it. It's all mine. Now we see Charlie Brown trying to maneuver under the ball to make a spectacular catch. He says to himself, if I catch this ball, we'll win our first game of the season. He's positioned himself underneath it, but he is a little shaky. He's saying, please let me catch it. Please let me be the hero. Please let me catch it. Please. On the other hand, do I think I deserve to be the hero? The ball's still in the air through all this. But the kid who hit it doesn't want to be the GOAT. Is a baseball game really this important? This ball's still in the air. Lots of kids all over the world never even heard of baseball. Lots of kids don't get to play at all or have a place to sleep and at that, the ball lands in Charlie Brown's mitt, but then bonk, pops out and hits the ground. Schroeder comes out to the mound and says to Charlie Brown, how could you miss such an easy pop fly? Charlie Brown says, I prayed myself out of it. I think, judging by the ones we picked, he's on a roll. I think this is another really funny strip and another really funny strip that I would only see in Peanuts.
It didn't need the punchline, I don't think. I mean, the funny thing is he's like wavering and thinking about all kinds of different things while there's balls in the air. Praying himself out of it doesn't seem to work because he doesn't really pray, does he?
Well, it does have "Please let me catch it," so it does look like he might be, talking to a higher power
Yeah, but
here.
that's
Right?
in one panel. I think it's
Yeah.
funnier that he's thinking about kids all over the world not having enough food or
Yeah, because actually I didn't think about it that way, but really the only panel that could be thought of really, I would think, as praying is that third panel on tier 2. Everything else is him talking to himself.
I don't think so. Why wouldn't he continue to be talking to who he was talking to in the other panel? I could totally see this as a prayer. He's continuing the conversation. It's one-sided, like with Lucy, conversations can be. But yeah, he totally could be. I mean, that was a revelation to me at the end. Was like, oh, this whole thing was a conversation with God.
The problem with all of Charlie Brown's problems are he's always focused on the wrong thing. He doesn't have to think about being a hero or asking a higher power to be a hero. He needs to catch the ball. He goes 12 steps down so far. I mean, I'm yelling at him like he's a real person. This is a brilliant comic strip that's creating this character.
One thing people around the world who never heard of baseball don't appreciate, it's like one of the hardest things in the world to judge where a fly ball's coming down.
Yeah, that's true.
You've got to
especially if it's been high up and long enough for you to see all of these things.
You got to judge his trajectory, and you can use the sound of the bat to tell you how far it was hit and the wind condition. I mean, to me, that's magic because I still have nightmares about a high fly ball and just not being in the right place when it comes down.
We had the worst Teener League baseball field in the world. I mean, it was just basically rocks. And behind behind right field was a creek, as we would call it, a creek that was just filled with sulfuric water from the mines and open sewage. So that was in right field, right? It was a dump. I mean, I grew up in the coal region. It was really a poor place. One kid played left, and so left field faced exactly west. So the sun would set and you couldn't see anything out there. And he invested in flip up sunglasses, which were pretty expensive at the time. And I remember standing in center field and a fly ball went to left field and he flipped the sunglasses down and he just stood there hitting his glove. And I'm like, is he ever going to put his glove up? And he didn't. He just completely lost it. And it hit him right between the eyes. He has, I think I've told this on this podcast before. He has like a butterfly scar in between his eyes where the glasses were for the rest of his life.
Oh my gosh. Wow. This may be controversial, but I actually kind of admire Charlie Brown because of this whole sequence, because he's going through a lot of really deep stuff that's more important than the game. So I kind of like, oh, okay, you go, Charlie Brown.
But it's not more important than the game because everybody's there for the game. That's the part that's problematic. Like, I think Charlie Brown often assumes his personal, moral, and philosophical quandaries, his emotional problems are the most important thing. They're actually not. There's 18 people there that are there to play the baseball game, not worry about the people in China who don't know baseball.
But it landed in the glove.
Yeah, but it's out.
So that was not the problem. The problem was he has a bad glove.
He's a bad glove. He didn't break it in. He didn't.
Doing a basket catch, which Willie Mays invented.
Also bad mistake.
Well, I'll respectfully disagree, Jimmy. I think he was going into something that was actually more important than the game, and if that's the way it plays, that's the way.
Well, no, he can do that. A great place to go through something more important than the game would be any place other than the game. That is what the rest of the world is for.
It's not always about the game, right?
Go outside these fences and you can contemplate anything you want. In the meantime, he's still trying. When you're talking about Charles Schultz being a character in the game, let's say God is a character in this, and God says, "Okay, you learned something very important. I'm going to let you drop the ball so you remember what's important." We
talk about how all the different ways you can read a Peanuts strip, and this is definitely one of those too. I think.
Catch the ball, Charlie Brown. All right. So how about we contemplate our existence and the fate of the universe and people who do or do not like baseball or know about baseball for a week and come back and pick up this conversation. I don't know how everyone else is going to like it, but I like this new format. I love that we get to talk longer about all this stuff that's it's Peanuts adjacent, but it's part of Peanuts. Like Charles Schultz has given us a lot to chew on, so I'm more than happy to listen and chat with my pals in even greater detail in the coming weeks and months. So if you want to keep this conversation going, you could do it a couple different ways. The first thing, like I said earlier, is you can go over to our website. You could sign up for the Great Peanuts Reread, and that will get you an email once a month that'll tell you what we're going to be covering in the upcoming episodes. You can also just follow us on social media. We're Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Threads, and we're Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you there. And of course, you could call the hotline or leave a text message, and that number is
717-219-4162.
And remember, when I don't hear from you, I worry. So that's going to be it for this week. Come back next week where it'll be more of the same. Until then, for Michael, Harold, and Liz, this is Jimmy saying, be of good cheer.
Yes.
Be of good cheer. Unpacking Peanuts is copyright Jimmy Gownley, Michael Cohen, and Harold Buchholz. Produced and edited by Liz Sumner. Music by Michael Cohen. Additional voiceover by Aziza Shakrawla Clark. For more from the show, follow Unpack Peanuts on Instagram and Threads. Unpacking Peanuts on Facebook, Blue Sky, and YouTube. For more about Jimmy, Michael, and Harold, visit unpackingpeanuts.com. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for listening.
Hopefully no one will notice you're being creative.